We are broadcasting. No, you remove it.
Is there a microphone?
No, there's no mic.
Okay, if I can have everyone's attention. It's a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Stacy Transancos. I first met Dr. Stacy Transancos because I was invited to attend a faith science seminar about a week long in Tucson, Arizona, about a year ago. Is that correct? And Stacy won a $10,000 Templeton Award. She teaches online. I actually taught her online. That was a humbling experience because I was trying to teach a course, Interaction of Faith and Science, which is very important. At least I tried. I'd say that we need to do more of that for the simple reason is science has such influence in our society. And people think so often through scientific terms. And if we want to evangelize effectively, we also need to appreciate the sciences. We are blessed with our Catholic faith that we don't see scientific truth as opposed to Catholic truth. That'd be heretical. Then we'd have a dual truth theory. We don't hold that. We see that God is the source of all truth. Scientific truths aren't in contradiction with truths of faith. Nonetheless, there is also relative autonomy between these two ways of approaching truth, faith and science. There's also some overlap, some connection. And Stacy Transancos, please, if you can introduce to us to some of that relationship between faith and science.
Father Cruiser introduced me to St. Bonaventure, and it changed the way I thought about and understood the abstractions in science. Probably have to take in things through our senses first.
You can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Or do I need a microphone?
Yeah.
Or do I just need to speak up? I can do that. What should I do?
That's not mic.
They're getting a microphone.
Okay, well, I can speak up. I'll just pretend like I'm home with the kids. I can project. Okay, so what I'm going to talk today about is it's an idea that I have that scientific literacy, some amount of it, not the full package, but some amount of it is necessary for evangelization. Because I'm going to first in the talk explain the way I see it, because it only recently occurred to me that I had come to this question differently than a lot of people do, because I was not always Catholic. I was a chemist before I was Catholic. And part of my conversion was finally facing up to that big question about who made these atoms that I love so much. So I'm going to explain that, and hopefully it'll help you see the way I'm coming at this question. And my daughters are here. Mercedes Grace, it's her birthday today, she's 12. And Lucy, Ana Lucia, our little light, our Grace and our light, are here. Lucy, do you want to try to advance the slides, sweetie? Hit the space bar. Yay, okay. Thank you. Okay, is that better now? Good. I do a lot of teaching online, and I usually just shout at my computer screen because I'm talking to people out there from the computer, so it's a little different. There is an analogy that, I'll just try not to trip over anything. There's an analogy that really struck me when I was reading Frank Sheed's Theology Insanity. Because one of the questions for me was, I was there, the will, I had the will to be Catholic. It was the intellect part I was struggling with. I wasn't sure what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to see. And my eyes were at the same time being open. But there was an analogy he has on page 25 of his book that I almost dropped the book when I read it because it struck me so much. He was talking about how to develop a Catholic intellect. That's what the book is about, Theology Insanity, seeing the universe sanely. And he says you have to look at the totality. You have to look at everything in relation to its whole, which makes sense. And that he said, he gave the analogy like eyeballs in a face. say there's a young man named Steve, and he has a girlfriend named Cheryl. And Steve thinks Cheryl has the most beautiful eyes ever, and he tells her this all the time. Well, Cheryl is very literal, and Cheryl has a high tolerance for pain. And say that Cheryl, in wanting to show Steve some appreciation for his affections, plucks her eyeballs out of her face, puts them on a plate, and says, "Here, Steve, I want you to have my eyeballs since you think they're so beautiful." There's something wrong about that, right? It makes the point very nicely that if you don't see things in the totality to which they belong, you're not seeing it right. And that's how it was for me as a chemist. I knew I didn't have the full picture. And your scientist heart longs to know the answers. And I didn't have the full picture. And when I converted and I started understanding philosophy and theology, I started to see science in the bigger light of faith. And it makes good sense. Because I was kind of like, say, Steve, I was like in a laboratory with eyeballs, so to speak. And I was studying them and elucidating the protein structures and the atomic details, and I could, the virtual eyeballs, I could tell you anything about the eyeballs, but it's like I had never seen them in a face. And if you've never seen eyeballs in a face, you don't really know what eyeballs are. And it's the same way with science. If you've never seen science in the light of faith, you really don't know what science is. And unfortunately, a lot of people in our culture really don't know what science is. My children will tell you, science is the study of the handiwork of God. It is our way of learning how God created this universe, our home that we live in. So when we study atoms or we study the periodic table, we're studying what God did. And that analogy made a lot of sense to me, and it's striking. Okay, punch it. Wrong way. You see it. Punch just the big space bar, sweetie. One more time. There you go. Okay, so when I was in graduate school, so I'm going to tell my story, but try to do it quickly. When I was in graduate school, I went there. I was non-religious. I guess I was a nun before nuns were called nuns. I never called myself an atheist. I never went that far. I just didn't care. But I did care about our planet. And I was concerned about the fate of the planet. I wanted to study something in graduate school because I figured if you can learn to manipulate atoms and simulate photosynthesis, that is a great way to solve some of our energy problems. Because this is photosynthesis, like you'll see in a biochemistry textbook. There are those chloroplast molecules, and in the thylakoid membrane within those, they're like little nanomachines. And there are all kinds of things ordered in here with protein complexes to angstrom scales, just so that the photosystem complexes will absorb energy from the sun and send it through all of the machinery and convert it into energy, which we use. And photosynthesis drives life on this planet. Like it makes the molecules that biological systems need for energy and structural components. So if you're a chemist and you're trying to solve energy problems, you think, well, if I can do what photosynthesis does, even a little bit, we'll have a new energy source. And there's lots of work on this even still today. But what they all do, and you don't hear it said too much, they're all trying to copy nature. They're trying to do what nature already does. Okay, hit it again. Thank you, sweetie. Just the space bar. There you go. Just got to do it slow. So in this system, this is the Z scheme of photosynthesis. It looks like a Z. Light is absorbed in photons. It excites an electron, and it passes the energy, passes the electron down this electron transfer chain. It's like passing a hot potato down a line. Every step, a little bit of energy is released in a very systematic way, and that energy is used to drive other reactions. And then it gets excited again, and it goes through another series of electron transfer. In my project at Penn State, with the team I was working on, it wasn't just me, our goal was to do one electron transfer step, just one. This is what leaves are doing right now out there, the ones that still have some green in them. This is what the leaves are doing, but we just wanted to do one electron transfer. There you go. Perfect. So this was our system. This was our intelligent designs. We had Cabicil, which is fused silica. They make it by spraying sand into a very hot flame, and it makes these little tiny particles that 5 grams of it has about 1/5 of an acre surface area. And we were growing polymers on it. So we charged the surface positive, and we had some negative inorganic sheets. We could exfoliate to 7 angstroms, to 1 molecule thick. Negative sheets, and then we had these positive polymers. Hit the thing again. If I do this, just hit the thing, okay? So we are signaling. And these polymers, which another postdoc student created or developed, they're simulating chlorophyll molecules, but he put them into a polymer, so they're positive charged. So our system was a positive on the surface, a negative sheet of inorganic materials, a positively charged polymer, negative sheet, positively charged polymer, and then it was supposed to absorb a photon of light, excite an electron in this polymer because it's similar to a chlorophyll molecule, and transfer the electron to the other polymer. And those inorganic sheets of 7 angstroms thick were supposed to keep the electron transferred long enough for us to measure it. We measured it by going into the basement where our laser system was set up. It had a 532 nanometer neodymium YAG laser. It was about the size of a cannon. And I was shooting it at a cuvette of our composite systems about the size of my pinky. It was very hard. And you have to screw everything down, and you have shutters, and you're trying to capture when that electron is excited, it has a fluorescence signal, and when it's transferred, there's another light signal, and you're trying to capture that with femtosecond laser spectroscopy. It's like trying to thread a needle with a wet noodle behind your back before you can blink. I mean, it was like really hard to capture this data. And we did get it to work. This was our scheme. You can see the similarity to photosynthesis. Thank you, Lucy. And these were our composites. So you see, we had a transmission electron microscope. We could see the Cabicil, and when we grew our composite, we went and looked at it again, and we're like, okay, I think we grew the layers. We called that a modeled coating in our Journal of the American Chemical Society paper that we published. Our modeled coating, and we were hoping that we had done this 1 electron transfer. Just to give you an idea of the humility of scientists' experiences, okay? That's what I'm trying to do, because we were doing cutting-edge work, trying to copy nature, and it was humbling. It was a lot of work. So I worked with postdocs the first 2 years, and postdocs went on and left me the project. I thought my life was complete, right? Because I have this project and doing what I dreamed of doing. My job was to do 2 electron transfers, 2. And I couldn't get it to work. And so I worked on it for about a year. I kept growing these things. It takes weeks to grow these. You have to look at the transmission electron microscope every step of the way. You have to set the laser up. And a lot of it doesn't work. You have to keep doing it over and over and over again. And I got really desperate at one point because I didn't think I was going to graduate. You have to do something in graduate school. You can't just hang out there for 4 years. And I hadn't done anything. I couldn't get it to work. And what do? If you can't get it to work, it's not like you can just beat it. You have to be intelligent about it. And there was one day that was really the metanoia in my thinking that I recall, and I wrote about it in the book I just published. There was one day where I went to look at my biochemistry textbook, and I opened it to that page on photosynthesis because I thought, well, I just haven't studied what nature does well enough. I'm going to study it, and I'm going to try to figure out what I'm missing, and I'm going to solve this problem, and I'm going to graduate, and I'm going to go off and work as a chemist. But the more I looked at that textbook, how did people discover this? I remember that feeling. It was extremely overwhelming, and then it hit me again. How did people write these textbooks? How did they figure all this stuff out? And I went over to the window because I was about to cry. And because I didn't know what I was going to do. I mean, everything I worked for was about to be gone. And I went to a window, and I'll never forget it. Outside of our lab windows on the 3rd floor, there was this old ginkgo biloba tree that I never really paid attention to, but it was big. And my eyes landed on it, and it hit me what I was staring at. And I fixated on that tree with some trepidation, because it occurred to me that right there in front of me, there were leaves, every square millimeter of which had some 500,000 chloroplasts, little 5-micron organelles. And in those chloroplasts, there was the thylakoid membrane, and I knew there were chlorophyll molecules, cyclic tetrapyroles with magnesium ions in the center, and pigment molecules with just slight chemical differences, such that altogether, in their angstrom spacings by protein complexes in the thylakoid membrane, they were absorbing every wavelength of visible light, because that's what hits the Earth, and absorbing photons, little packets of energy defined by E equals Planck's constant times the frequency. Where did that come from? And they were absorbing photons, and electrons were being excited in these chlorophyll molecules and transferred to a reaction center in 1/10 of a nanosecond with a 90% quantum efficiency. Our project never got above 30 for one electron transfer. Transferring it through this chain, and I knew that. And I knew it was going into this photosystem too, where a bound plastoquinone was reducing another plastoquinone, and it was reducing a pool of plastoquinone molecules before the resulting plastoquinol reduced the cytochrome BF5 complex, another whole complex, which transported protons into the thylakoid lumen, which before those electrons went on to a plastocyanin, and that reduced another chlorophyll molecule in photosystem 1, which had another set of transmembrane units. The book called them pigments A0 and AX, and ferredoxins FX, FO, FA, FB, and FD. And then those electrons went on to reduce nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, NADPH to NADP plus to NADPH, which made a proton gradient, which gave the energy to drive the synthesis of adenosine. You see all this. To drive the synthesis of adenosine triphosphate from adenosine diphosphate in the donor phosphate group. Meanwhile, water molecules were being stripped of their electrons to produce the oxygen that we breathe. And in the independent reactions of photosynthesis, the NADPH was reducing ATP to produce the 3-carbon precursor for carbohydrates, sugars, cellulose, the things that play very important roles in biological molecules, not the least of which is the storage of energy, like when you eat an apple, and structural components like dietary fiber and the backbone of ribonucleic acid and deoxyribonucleic acid. And I also knew that photosynthesis captures 6 times more energy from the sun than the entire human race uses in a year. Some quintillion kilojoules of energy it stores, fixing 100 billion tons of carbon. And I was looking at that tree, and it was like I looked up from my silica balls in the lab, and I saw my science in the totality to which it belonged. I saw something bigger, and it was scary. It was almost like I was looking at the face of God. It was like in that moment, I saw God. And you might think that knowing all of that about photosynthesis and seeing that and having that insight, I would get down on my knees and accept the gift of faith right there. But that's not what happened. I did not convert for another 15 years. But I never, ever, ever was unclear about the fact that as a scientist, I turned my back on what I saw that day. And I didn't have the courage to answer the biggest question of all about where it came from, because it is so obvious. And I guarantee you every scientist knows that. Maybe they don't admit it. Maybe it hasn't hit them hard enough. But scientists know that their number one job is to study the order and predictability in the universe, in nature, and to try to manipulate it for the benefit of mankind, which is a good thing. But that was my experience. And so when I did convert, the intellectual part about the first line of the creed, that was no problem for me. The other part was facing my sins, because if God can do photosynthesis and Christ is a personal God and there's a truth there, then really the hard part of converting is, what is that truth going to demand of me? Well, it did demand a lot. I ended up leaving, I went ahead, I did graduate, by the way. I did something else. I had a patent and published in Science Journal, something called Nano Bubble Pack. I never got a photosynthesis project to work. The balls we were using, I found another way to press them together, polymerize something around and dissolve them away. And while everybody was trying to make a crystal and three-dimensional core network, I just did it like that, invoking an old industrial technique for bakelite resin. And I graduated. But then 5 years into my career, my husband asked me a question: how do you really define success? And that was the wake-up call when it all came together. Because I realized being a mother was the thing that I really loved the most, and I was missing the lives of my inorganic, organic, multi-composite assemblies who called me mommy. And I left with a certain finality. So when you leave DuPont, you don't really go back. So I left, but then I came into the faith. My husband's Catholic, and he just kept gently asking me questions and letting me answer them. And I was welcomed into the church about 3 years later. We had 5 children in a very short time. I found out that I could study theology at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And so while I was nursing babies, bearing babies, chasing babies, filling sippy cups and bottles and wiping heinies, I got a master's degree in dogmatic theology here. This is my first time to ever be here, though. Because I did it, I couldn't even leave for the graduation because the children were too small at the time. But so it means a lot to me to be here and to be talking about this stuff, because the dogmatic theology that I studied, I loved dogmatic theology, by the way. Reading St. Thomas Aquinas at first was so painful, but I'm like, I know this pain. It's the same pain you feel when you read a physical chemistry textbook. You have to read every line. You have to know what the words mean. And you can't just get away with not knowing what one line means, because you'll pay for it later, because you have to understand the systematic whole of it. And it made sense. Dogmatic theology was really exciting to me as a scientist, because I'm like, I get this logic. I know what's going on here. It's the same kind of logic that scientists put together. You have to make sense of everything. It all has to fit together. And so now I see both. And my life now is so exciting because I am with my kids. And I'm telling people about this. I'm like, why doesn't everybody just get down on their knees and weep for joy at the periodic table? Because when you understand that, like it's an insight into things. The truth of our destiny, and then the truth of nature where we live, and it just gives you such a deeper insight. Okay. This was what was in my biochemistry textbook that day, by the way. Hit it again. Do you see that? Can you imagine why I might have been a little blown away? Hit it again. That's not all. That's only part of the page. That was the whole page. And so the cool thing is now, and why I stress people need to have some kind of scientific literacy. If you get to the end of your life and you don't have some appreciation for how God created, this is I know you can't see the details, but this is the metabolic pathways. That little bit right there is photosynthesis. This is how photosynthesis drives our metabolism and all the other living things on this earth. I mean, we're connected. Life is connected at the atomic level in amazing ways. And when you know this stuff, and you take a walk in nature, like my curtains. This is where my husband who led me to the faith, now he bought me a house, a 100-year-old Adirondack hunting lodge in the mountains. And this is where I walk my dogs every day. And this is where our children are growing up. I couldn't have a talk without showing off the family. But this is what the truth demanded of me. And it's wonderful. And my children are growing up understanding that science is the study of the handiwork of God. They don't make straight A's and everything, but they're learning. They're homeschooled. I'm teaching them at home. I'm working with Colby Academy to teach physics and chemistry to other students, but all of my high school students. It is my prayer and my hope, and the college students. They're inoculated from this confusion in secular culture. I hope they understand, because my students, when I'm teaching them about quantum numbers and the periodic table, Go ahead, Bruce. They hear me talk about the wonder. This is Pope Francis' quote. Stimulating wonder before the profound mystery of creation. Faith broadens the horizons of reasons, and it sheds greater light on the world, which discloses itself to scientific investigation. I call it science in the light of faith. And I just teach kids that. And it's really, people are always asking me, parents and educators, how do we inoculate our kids from this atheism? Because there are polls that show kids as young as age 12 are going off and saying, I'm an atheist now because of science. Science has all the answers. If you just tell them this, they'll understand that it doesn't make any sense. It makes about as much sense as mom putting mashed potatoes on the table and you going, well, I don't believe in mom anymore because there's mashed potatoes. That's not how, they came from mom. How did the mashed potatoes not prove mom's there? It's mom did that for you. And it's the same way with physics and chemistry. Okay, again. And I was just teaching my students this the other day, but I'm not going to go deep into this, but it is amazing to me. People are like, why do you say we should weep over the periodic table? Because this was discovered. Do you want to know what separates each element from the next one? And these are the elements that make up everything right now. In your body, in your chair, in this building, the elements make up everything on this earth. They are separated by one proton at a time, as if giving marching orders. They're one proton at a time, and there are no missing spots. When there were missing spots, and the scientists said, I bet you we find that element, and they did. And they even predicted the properties of that element because things are that ordered. These are electron orbitals. One more. These are the quantum numbers. That's the quantum mechanics that they developed in the 1920s and on that order the periodic table. And I just encourage you to look that up sometime if you haven't, because when you see it that way and you understand that it's not just the atoms that are ordered, but it's the protons and the electrons around the atoms, because these all describe where the electrons might be. We don't know where they really are. We can't, that's the indeterminacy principle. You can't determine where the electrons are. They're too small, they're moving too fast, and they're moving in waves, and you just can't. You can't. It's a fundamental fact of nature and our limits of being human. Go ahead. When we do balancing equations, this is stoichiometry, something chemistry students generally hate. But when you're like, the reason you can figure this out is because of the periodic table. Like, if things weren't that ordered, you wouldn't be able to do this. Go ahead. But I just tell them that. But there's another thing. So the first point I want to make very clearly, and I hope I did make it, it's that you have to see modern science with an awe and wonder and with a confidence and a joy. A lot of Catholics I talk to are kind of afraid of science and what it might say. It can never disprove our faith. If somebody says it does, it's because that person is confused and that person is not looking at a face with eyeballs in it. That person's looking at eyeballs on a plate. Okay, help the person to see the bigger picture. That's the right way to go about it. Because a lot of Catholics they get really mad and they get really scolding of the atheists. And I think that in confidence and joy, we should sit down with them and say, why don't you answer that bigger question? Why don't you think about it? Because it took me 15 years from the time I saw it. And you never know when you plant seeds. So that's the one point. The other point is there's something that I was talking about in the book. I was going to read it, but I can't see the computer now. But in my book, and I'm just referring to it because it's on my mind, because it just launched 2 weeks ago. But I did start out in the second part of the book with a story that I made up. It's about how I think that Catholics and Christians are, in general, the evangelicals and Protestants, it's how I see them approaching science and faith. Because the relationship to science and faith to me is not about reconciliation. I don't even like that word anymore. It's about elevation. It's about raising people up to see more. If you say reconciliation, it's like one has to give, the other has to give. It's not really like that. But I think the situation we're in right now, I had punched it against me. A long time ago in a galaxy far away, it's a period of conflict. Out in the great darkness called ignorance, the rebel battleship of scientism soars through space and time and claims its victory against the old reign of religion. This is what I think people think. Press it. Today, the sons and daughters of scientism say they have the knowledge to save the universe. They perceive they are pursued by religion's sinister agents, and they claim they race ahead in progress, while the followers of religion, encumbered with their dogmas, fade into the darkness, pleading that there is no conflict. That's what I think people think about it. And the response, if you think that way, the response has been that we have the creationism, where the books say, don't think about evolution, don't think about the Big Bang, reject it all, because I get the perception, it's just my perception, that they're afraid science is going to disprove our faith. And it seems like they stand back at this battleship and they shoot their arrows long and high, but they don't realize it's just pinging the metal. It's not getting through to the people on the battleship who are confused. And there's another group, the Intelligent Design Squad, and they came in more recently with their different approach. Instead of shooting at the spaceship of scientism, they're trying to get on it. And they keep getting pushed off by the scientists who say, that's not really science, we don't want you on here with us. And they think that's unfair. But I think both of those approaches are not effective, okay? I am a creationist too. I pray the creed and I mean it. But I'm also not afraid to consider what anthropologists say or what evolutionary biologists have to say. I can roll my sleeves up. I can assess whether I think they're right or wrong. I can pick out when they go beyond science and start saying things that are not scientific, and I can tell them to stop. But you got to have those conversations. And the way I study Father Stanley Yockey, who was a Catholic priest and a physicist, and his idea is that how many people have read Father Stanley Yockey? He's hard to read, to me anyway, because he assumes you have some knowledge of philosophy and history that I didn't have. And I had to work through his books, but his message to me was one of that confidence. His message was, those groups that do that, they're not seeing it right. And the people like him, who are the priests leading the people and telling the people about science, who are confident. I keep coming back to that word, confidence. They're able to sit down and say, okay, this is what we have to do with the young people. You have to sit down and say, okay, tell me what you read that was confusing. Let me take a look at it. And you have to be unafraid to read scientific papers. Because if you don't read the scientific papers, when I say scientific literacy, I don't really mean reading the textbooks, although you may refer to them. I mean being able to read the papers, because that's where everything's happening right now. If you want to know what scientists are doing, read that. A lot of the conversations are about 2 decades behind, because they're talking about stuff that scientists aren't even talking about anymore, especially with evolution. And they're talking about stuff that have ethical questions that if we don't get our heads around and sit down and learn to talk about them, about what it really is, then we're going to miss an opportunity. So I describe that in the book. The way I see it as Catholics need to be the leaders. That's what we do at Holy Apostles. That's what I always love. They're developing leaders for the new evangelization. We have to be leaders. We have to stand up and say, I'm not afraid. If we have our faith and we pray for the grace to be martyrs, if it comes to that, we can never ever think for 1 minute that God created all of this matter and energy unable to do what he intended it to do. Of course he did. And we need to approach it that way. And we need to realize that a lot of people are just wrong. And we need to talk to them about that and help them. Okay, go ahead, sweetie. Go ahead again. So that's where I got to the course, Reading Science in the Light of Faith. About 2 summers ago, there was this Templeton grant, because the John Templeton Foundation tries to promote the faith and science dialogue, and they said there's $10,000 grants for 20 U.S. seminaries if you can come up with a course to teach science. Now, I know that you all are very busy and that you have a full course, you have a full curriculum already, and they know that too. And so they're not saying go in and make this part of the curriculum, but offer it, at least offer it. A course to teach. And they said to the professors, what do you think needs to be taught? And that's where I came up with it. I was walking actually one day in those woods, and I was thinking it over. Like, what is the one thing I would tell seminarians if I could? I would tell you to learn how to read scientific papers. I'm influenced by Father Stanley Yaki, who was influenced by Pierre Duhem. And he had this statement that if you try to talk about, he was talking to Catholic philosophers at a meeting in Brussels. If you try to talk about science without knowing much about science, people will know. The freethinkers, he called them then, and I guess we still call them that too. He said that the freethinkers will know, and they'll make fun of the Catholics for not knowing what they're talking about with science. And he said something I think is kind of radical. I don't put it up here because I agree with it. He said, as long as they have not trained people with deep scientific knowledge, they must be kept silent. Maybe in the 1800s that was true in his environment, but it's not true today. You don't need to be kept silent if you can't talk about science. You just need to learn how to keep up with science. And I've come the other way. Like, I've learned how to read the magisterial documents and St. Thomas Aquinas. If I can do that, y'all can read scientific papers because you already have the skills to do it. You already have the skills. It's just a matter of transferring those skills. And that's what the course I developed does. It just shows you what a paper is, how it's organized, what the scientists do, how to sort through it. You don't need to read all of it. Most of the time, you don't need to read all of it. You only need to read all. It's like a recipe book. You only need to read it all if you want to know what they did. Okay, go ahead. Oops. And so some things, are these advancing by themselves? Probably. Did you hit it or did it go by itself? Oh, okay, that's fine. I'm wondering if I set it up to advance. I didn't mean to. Okay, so what I'm going to show you next are 4 papers that I have found, just to give you an example of why we need to be looking at this stuff. That is not Pierre Duhem, that is Darwin. They do look a lot alike. But this was a paper that came out. So this came out in Salon.com. It's a secular media outlet, and a writer who's not Christian. God is on the ropes, the brilliant new science that has creationists and the Christian right terrified. And he was referring to the work of Dr. Jeremy England at MIT. He's a biological physicist, and he had, I think, a great idea. He was talking about thermodynamics and evolution. And his point was that we see driving forces in nature, and maybe a part of evolution, like beyond what Darwin said, but maybe a part of evolution is also self-assembling thermodynamics, living systems reacting to forces in the environment. And he wanted to study it. And it's pretty complicated what he's talking about, but that's really all it was. He was saying maybe there's some other natural explanation, and it has to do with molecules and thermodynamics and energy and entropy. And he had some calculations to simulate that. But people picked that up immediately. And I went and read the paper, and the paper was not that big of a deal. Scientifically, it was brilliant, but to our faith, there was nothing there to be worried about. Because I read the paper, I knew that. But meanwhile, in the media, this got shared like 37,000 times, and there were responses from Christian groups to this guy. And all along, they have the straw man faith and science argument. They're talking about the wrong thing. And so my question to you is, what would you do if you saw this? What would you do if a 14-year-old young man came to you and said, what do we do? Okay, could you go to the paper? Could you sort it out? Could you guide him? Because sometimes the papers have things that do contradict our faith, and you need to pick it out and you need to sort it out. Sometimes they have things that are contradictory. Sometimes they have things that are consistent. Sometimes they just have legitimate opinions that we don't know the full answer yet. And that's what I do in the course. What's consistent with our faith? What's contradictory? What are legitimate opinions you can put on the shelf and think about later, store it in your mind? But it was just a whole missed opportunity. It was a whole missed opportunity. It was unfortunate. And I cringe when I see something like that getting shared 37,000 times on the internet. Because who is reading that? And who is being misled by it? And we need to be out there saying, come here and sit down and let me explain this to you. It's not anything to worry about. Next one. So that's one paper. There was another one that it was in the Telegraph, and it went all around, like 58,000 shares from Live Action News. And Catholic Online said, there's the discovery of the spark of life. Science may have proven the church has been right all along. And they had this experiment that gave a flash of light, and everybody was talking about how that's proof of ensoulment. And it wasn't that. The paper actually described a process where they were using in vitro fertilization, which why was anybody excited about that in the first place? They were using in vitro fertilization. This happened on a microscope slide. Part of the fertilization, when the sperm meets the egg, there's all kinds of orchestrated chemistry that goes on there. And nobody knows everything that happens in those moments. But there is one reaction that involves metals, where one metal is triggered to move out of the egg as it's being fertilized, and another metal needs to build up, because those metals, one needs to get out, the other needs to stay in, because it drives some other biological functions that are going to happen. Well, they put a chemical tag called Flozin. You buy it, they put it in the medium around the eggs, and when something that simulated fertilization, it wasn't even the full sperm, touched the eggs, they saw a fluorescent signal. When the metal inside moved out, it caused a fluorescent signal, and they detected it with the microscope. It doesn't happen in the mother's womb like that. There's no flash of light. The flash of light was just because they put a dye in human eggs with a simulated sperm and saw it. They were just trying to figure out, see how some of these flashes are brighter than others? They had detected the ones with the brighter flashes had a more effective transport mechanism, and those eggs in vitro fertilization are more likely to survive than the other ones. Therefore, they know which ones to get rid of and which ones to try to keep. So the whole point was messed up in the beginning. We don't need to know that. But it was missed. There is no flash of light. And what happens is when Catholics go out and talk about that, yeehaw, we found the flash of light. Now we know that there's ensoulment. That's proof of our faith. It makes it look like we didn't believe that in the first place. And I don't want kids to see that. I don't want young people to see that. I don't want anybody to think that. We're supposed to start there. We're supposed to say, yes, if there is a human body, there is a human soul. And we know that in faith. We may not ever find the single chemical mechanism for when ensoulment occurs. I think it's an indeterminate thing, just like you don't know how many electrons are in your nose right now, and you never ever will. It's unknowable. I think some of those things are just not knowable, but we know it in faith. We know if there's a human body, there's a human soul. And to get excited about something like this, when the person, and it started with the lady at Telegraph, she didn't read the whole paper. She didn't read the abstract of the paper, and it confused so many people. And that's another reason, point 2, why to read scientific papers. Next one. There was a paper a few years ago, the first human was discovered in Ethiopia. And everybody's like, nuh-uh, that's not Adam, you're just trying to disprove the Bible. But that wasn't the point. The point was, the title was unfortunate. Whoever wrote the title, it's clickbait, it's trying to get hits, it's trying to get you to read it. But that wasn't even what they meant. A commentator, this is not the researcher, he was talking about it as it's a complex picture of early humans. It challenges us to consider the very definition of what it is to be human, but it's not what you think. He was talking about small teeth and jaws. He wasn't talking about intellect and stuff like that we like to think about. That's not even what they mean by it. I wish they did think about it that way, but some of these anthropologists don't. But they just found, all it was, when you read the paper, they found a jawbone, a fraction of a jawbone that seems to be older than the first human fossils they found before, the species Homo. And that it would be considered a transition fossil. They think it adds more information. The paper was all about studying more measurements than you ever want to read about those teeth. Okay, they just measured the teeth in every different way. And that's all it was about. And the media takes it though, first human discovered. And that's just going to confuse people. But if we can read the paper, we can be like, that's not what it really was. The real title of the paper had nothing to do with that. But the real title of the paper was, we found a new kind of fossil in a new place. It might mean something. That's what most scientific papers are like. We did something little bitty, and it might mean something. Because scientists get excited about the very smallest things because their work is hard. Next. This was the actual paper. They found a new fossil at the site where they've been digging, basically. That's all it says. Okay, next one. So it's important. The point is, you got to read the papers. There's another reason, and this is disturbing. And I spent a lot of time just mourning after reading this. But do you remember, and I hate to show it to you, but I want you to understand why it's important to read these papers. Do you remember when David DeLayden, the Center for Medical Progress, had all the Planned Parenthood videos? And he was trying to expose them for using aborted fetuses, taking their organs out and using them in research. It happens. I've been reading scientific papers for almost 3 decades. It's been happening that whole time. It happens routinely. Ethical committees at our universities have already decided it's okay. If the reasoning is like this: if the mother doesn't want the child, it's better than throwing away the dead body. They use the organs for research. And David DeLayden was exposing this. He was exposing the Planned Parenthood people making deals with the chemical companies about how they're going to get them the freshest brain and the freshest liver, and because what they do is they go in right at the moment when the baby's going to be killed, and they harvest the organs. And it's all set up and lots of money in it. And when that happened, it shocked, rightly so, the country. And there's been repercussions from it. But the thing I was thinking was, if those people were like, that just can't happen, it can't happen. It does happen. Read this. Well, you can't read it, I'm sorry, that's my fault. Read it anyway. No. I'll read it. This is a paper from 1972. This is the abstract, the extract they called it then, but it's a summary of the paper. You don't even have to read the whole paper. In this paper, it says some kind of enzyme activity was absent from human fetal liver and brain in as early as 6 weeks of gestation. Human fetal liver contained higher concentrations of an enzyme. Human fetal brain, I'm just going through here quickly. And how do they know this? They injected some enzymes in the umbilical cord of human fetuses. How do you think they did that? And incorporated some enzymes into the liver and brain, and they measured it for 10 minutes before harvesting the organs. How in the world do you think they did that? 1972. US researchers collaborating with researchers in Finland. You can't see this man's name, but that's the researcher. It starts with an R. Next one. In 1972, he was doing this. Here's the methods. So if you know the way around scientific papers and you know to read the methods, because that's where they tell you what they did. In the methods, he says, in vivo experiments for in vivo. In vivo means in the living body. In vitro means you do it in the test tube, like the spark of life. In vivo means in the body. That's a red flag right there. For in vivo experiments, each fetus immediately after removed from the uterus was injected with approximately 100 micro-somethings of either methionine, it's an amino acid, or an SL-cysteine, another amino acid. Amino acids, I'll get to that in a minute. Contained in a 0.5 milliliter of a 0.9% solution of salt at pH 7. In some experiments, unlabeled cysteine as well as the methionine were injected. All injections were made into the umbilical cord through a short Teflon catheter, which was then rinsed with 0.2 milliliters of 0.9% sodium chloride. The whole cord was clamped on the fetal side of the point of entry of the catheter to prevent blood loss during the experiment. After 10 minutes, the cord was severed close to the fetus, and as much blood as possible was collected into a tube which contained heparin as anticoagulant. The fetal organs were quickly removed and dropped into liquid nitrogen and prepared for analysis. And I remember reading that, and I wrote about it, and it did get out to some people. But the point is, you don't think this happens? It's like they are telling you in their own handwriting, because that's exactly what the paper is, that they do it. It happens. It's been happening since 1972. It's been happening ever since. Sometimes they don't tell you. What we have now are private corporations funding this, so they don't have to publish scientific papers. They can do what they want in their own doors. And yeah, It's a real problem in our time, and it's not going away. We have to address it. We have to convince people why it's wrong, because the thinking is, if abortion's okay, better than throwing away the bodies to use them for science to try to make other things better. I was talking about amino acids. Do the next one. Just another part of this paper. During this period, the heart continued to beat and spontaneous movement was seen. You dig through the paper, they were taking the babies out of the mother, injecting them with amino acids, letting the body, like a machine, process the amino acids through the brain and liver, holding them there for 10 minutes with their heart still beating and them still moving. I don't know what the mother was doing. I don't know what they told the mother was going to happen. I can't imagine any woman agreeing to that, but it was in Finland. And then they killed the baby and took the organs. And it's right there in the paper. It's right there. So last year, everybody's like, oh, I can't believe this happens. And like, if people would read the scientific papers, you would know this has been happening for a long time. Why were they doing it? That's the same name that was on the 1972 paper. He's been working with Nestle Corporation for decades. He edited the proceedings from one of their annual meetings. They're trying to make better infant formula. They were doing this research to understand how premature babies metabolize amino acids so they can make infant formula better. Okay? If you put those pieces together, you know this. But if you don't know to put those pieces together, it just happens. And nobody ever said, nothing looks wrong about that. What's wrong with having a meeting at Nestle Corporation about making infant formula better? Nothing. It's based on something very, very disturbing though. Next. So there's 4 papers. That's from the amino acid. Yeah, go ahead. So there's 3 points then that I made, and I'll cover them at the very last slide, which I'm almost to. This is just me speaking now. This story struck me too. I started out with Frank Sheed's eyeballs story. But when I was reading Father Yaki's work, he also called attention to this point. He said, early Christian martyrs, they died before they would accept the ridiculousness of pantheism. They refuted the errors, even to the point of death. And we need that kind of confidence today. We need to be so confident about what we pray in the creed and what we believe that we can go out there and interact with people. We gotta be unshakable, unshaken. And this story always struck me as just heartbreaking because I relate to it as a mother. But it's that story in wisdom where basically they're being asked to violate God's laws. They're being told, insisted, ordered by the government, by the king, to eat pork, eat the flesh of swine. And the mother and her sons refuse to. You could make the argument, well, just eat it. Who cares? God will understand. No, in those days, just my opinion, is how I interpreted the story. But in those days, it wasn't just about eating the pork. It was about refusing to give in to the sway of the culture. It was about standing firm on God's laws and doing what God told them to do. And they wouldn't give in. The mother and her 7 sons would not eat the swine. And it wasn't really about that, but that was the battle they stood on. And the king got so mad because they wouldn't give in. And he started killing them. Remember the story? He didn't just kill them. He started torturing them. He picked one son while the other sons and the mom were watching and started torturing him. And it says in the scripture, it was cutting out their tongues, ripping the skin off their feet, burning them, roasting them alive, screaming and suffering though they were. Just relentless torture. And the mother was standing there telling them, this is the first place in the Bible where it mentions creation out of nothing, creation ex nihilo. And it comes out of the mouth of that mother. And she's telling her sons, my son, have pity upon me that bore thee 9 months in my womb and gave thee suck 3 years and nourished thee and brought thee up into this age. I beseech thee, my son, look upon heaven and earth and all that is in them and consider that God made them out of nothing, and mankind also. So thou shalt not fear this tormentor, but being made a worthy partner with thy brethren, receive death that in that mercy I may receive thee again with thy brethren. She had such faith, facing death. This was the youngest son right before he was killed, and then they killed her too. And that's the kind of radical faith we have to be able to engage in the faith and science dialogue. I mean, the faith and science dialogue seems like such a little thing compared to that, but we have to have that kind of confidence. And I think it's infectious. I think it's a joy. I know from personal experience that when you understand science, taking a walk in the fall is something that can just make you so emotional. It's very emotional for me just walking and looking at all the things about it and teaching kids about it. And so those are the three things. Okay, that's the last slide. What I started with, I think we need to express a modern awe and wonder for science, and say it's the study of the handiwork of God. We need to help inoculate other Catholics from this scientism business. We need to be able to talk to them about what's in the scientific literature and help them navigate it. And we need to lead in confidence, because that's what we do, the apostles. Okay, thank you guys. Thanks so much for having me here to talk. Okay, well, what do we now, questions? Or?
11:30.
11:33. From my understanding, it goes to 11:45.
Okay.
Well, actually, I do know that. It goes to 11:45, so you'd be in charge of questions, and Dr. Chairman has a question.
First of all, I want to say I am so proud that Holy Apostles Online has genius professors like this in it. And I'm hoping many of you will take this optional course, because I think it's really important. But what I want to ask you is this. Given the fact that many of the people who will be taking the course are English as a second language, one. Secondly, that many of them only have not all, but I have no idea, but I don't think most people have a good grasp of science to begin with. I would like you to tell them, will they be able to understand you, the book, and the course, because you'll be doing this distance on Skype, will they be able to understand you even if they didn't understand a lot of the science part you said today?
I'm aware of that. So will they? I hope so. I try. I have been teaching homeschool high school students to communicate, practice working on my communication. When I worked for DuPont, that's what I did. I was one of the scientists that communicated with the marketing people. But I'm real big on communicating. Like the way I work online is I try to develop a relationship with the student, the teacher-student relationship. Like I want students to ask me if there are questions, to understand that they can say, I will push students to don't just say I don't get it, but explain exactly where you understand and where you start to get confused so I can fix that part. But also the course is not heavy on science per se, like not textbook stuff. There's 3 students in the course right now. And one of them said, I didn't think I could do this, but she's reading the scientific papers now that she knows what to look for. You look at the title, you're like, I don't need that. The title, I don't need that. The abstract, I don't need that. So she's learned how to find what she needs and summarize it the way she needs to. And she said, I didn't know I could do this. I didn't know it was this easy. But so yes, it's online. There will be a challenge there between communication and a challenge with the language. All I can say is that I commit my expertise and my time and my passion to whatever students are in the class. I take teaching very seriously. I don't just do it, I love to teach. That's my vocation now, motherhood and teaching. So all I can promise is that I will try my best and I will listen to the students and try to meet the need. It's a different area that we're in, and I'm a scientist. I'll try experiments and see what works until we figure it out. Okay.
I have 2 questions, one simple, one not so simple. The first one is your slide surprised me on the periodic table, because I saw the noble gases moved over next to the first period. Is there a different way we're looking at the periodic table that the noble gases are now moved over there? Because that's the first time I've seen that.
The it was just helium, I think, because helium is the oddball. Hydrogen and helium are the oddballs. That periodic table is, if you go to ptable.com, I use it with my students. There's an orbitals periodic table, and so the way that table is organized, all the s orbitals, all the p orbitals, all the p orbitals over here, the d orbitals, and the f orbitals. And since helium has an s orbital, but it's also a filled energy level like a noble gas, it's usually over there, but then it's over there, and you see them in different ways.
Okay, thank you. The second question, a lot of my thinking about faith and science is informed by Mary Migley. One of the things she talks about, particularly in evolution as a religion, is the notion that this type of assuming empirical science, assuming a metaphysical cosmology, is bad for science also. Can you talk about the way that scientism is bad for empirical science?
Yeah, because it instills in you a kind of blindness. Like it's like they just look at the eyeballs and think they're going to find all the answers, and they're unwilling to see the eyeballs in the face. And you got to be able to see that. That's the point Frank Shea was making, that nothing is rightly known except in the totality to which it belongs. And so for the scientists out there who are under this sway of scientism, it is like they're just looking here. They won't look up and see the bigger picture. And why they won't, there are reasons, personal reasons. Maybe they're afraid of the truth. Maybe they just don't think they can do it. Maybe they, I think a lot of it is fear of the truth, what it will demand. But that's how I see scientism. I think that's the scientists who do that, because I've read some of their books, and it's just pervasive through their whole book. I find myself like, why won't you just look up? Like, why won't you just look up and see what you're missing? And they won't. I don't know how to get them to, except sometimes just say it simply. Why won't you ask that bigger question? Why won't you accept the gift of faith? Try it. You're a scientist. Try it and see. It's like sometimes atheists talk to me a lot, and I tell them, it's like you have never accepted the gift of faith. It's like I'm a scientist in the lab doing all the work, and you're out in the hallway yelling into me that I don't know what I'm doing, but you never even came in and tried it. You never tried on faith in your laboratory of life. So you don't know what you're missing.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
The last time I studied chemistry was about 45 years ago. In about 2 minutes, can you tell me what I've missed in the last half century?
In chemistry, I think the biggest thing in chemistry right now, people would disagree, and I understand that. Nanotechnology. Nanotechnology was the big buzzword back in the 90s when I was studying as a graduate student. And it's all about self-assembly and nanotechnology. But the thing that always strikes me about nanotechnology means manipulating atoms and molecules to do machinery or to do, computer chips or whatever, but trying to manipulate atoms and molecules to do specific jobs. Every single bit of it is based on mimicking nature, which is why I made that point. The most cutting edge chemistry we have today, materials chemistry, nanochemistry, they're all copying nature. They're trying to, and sometimes they know they can't, so they use nature and manipulate some other things around it, like bacteria or something in their process. But what have you missed the last 20 years? I don't know.
Let me just clarify a little bit. We used to have a very physical sort of particle idea about the atom. Which had these little pieces and they evolved, and how it held together, we don't know. But I hear the word quantum mechanics,
Okay.
and I'm not quite sure what that's referred to and why that is kind of a big breakthrough concept in describing the atom.
Yeah, it is. What quantum mechanics is supposed to do is try to predict where the electron might be. So the atom is not really a hard little sphere. The atom is a nucleus, but the nucleus has this dense mass of protons, which are extremely small. That protons and neutrons, protons are positively charged. It's like a marble suspended in the Houston Astrodome in size. Like all the electrons are out here, the atom is mostly empty space. The nucleus is in the very center, and it's extremely tiny and extremely dense, and the strong force there holding the protons and neutrons together. But quantum mechanics deals with what the electrons are doing outside of there. Like Niels Bohr thought they orbited the nucleus like planets around the sun, but then the Schrödinger equation and the wave function described that table I put up, where it has 4 different quantum numbers that describe what the electron might be doing. And so every atom actually has its own fingerprint of electrons, because every atom only has a unique number of protons, which means a neutral atom has a unique number of electrons, which means what they're doing and how they're described quantum mechanically different for every one. That's how come we can look at light from stars and know what elements are there. They have a light fingerprint. And so the way quantum mechanics has changed the way we think about chemistry, in my opinion, is so we don't know where the electrons are. We talk about it in terms of probability. But I think philosophically the question was kind of humbling for a lot of people, because what do you mean we can't know where the electrons are? You can. It's like saying use your finger and tell me how many grains of sand you touch. There's just a limit to what you can know. And some people do interpret quantum mechanics, though, to mean that electrons, there's some free will there that we can control at a quantum mechanical level. Maybe that's the explanation for free will. And I just say to people like that, stop looking at physics for an explanation of a spiritual power. You're looking in the wrong place. And whatever, and I tell people, whatever the electrons are doing, even if we can never know it, they're still obeying laws of physics that God created. It's that simple.
Will your books be in the cafeteria during lunch?
I have some, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be good if you laid them out with
Okay.
cafeteria so some of us can look at it, maybe someone buy it.
Okay.
I have a 40-year experience too with, studying chemistry, and I studied in Mexico. I graduated from Mexican high school. I would be interested in knowing from everyone here, I had to memorize the periodic table when I was a freshman in high school. Memorizing. So first of all, I want to ask everyone, how many of you studied chemistry in high school? How many of
That's a
you
good question.
had to memorize the periodic table? Memorize. And then you were quizzed on how many atoms and which forms, which things came all of those together, right? I think you're ready. I think the United States are really behind. My 3 kids in this country never had to memorize the periodic table. And sometimes our stature in the international community is on the lower end. And we may have some brilliant people right here ready for the course.
Yeah. You're exactly right. That's why I point out the periodic table, because that's something all the high school students are taught. And I don't like, a lot of the dialogues tends to be higher level stuff. No, it's right there in the periodic table. So thank you. Thank you for making that point. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
We'll have to end there because of the kitchen, and it ends at 12:45. But at the same time, feel free to talk with our wonderful teacher. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
And Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.